Well, good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to the first module of OutNext 2020. I'm Todd Sears, and I'm the founder and CEO of OutLeadership. And before we kick off this exciting module in this program, I wanted to take a couple minutes just to share with you a little context for what OutNext is and what you're about to experience. I launched OutNext 8 years ago as part of the OutLeadership umbrella because as I looked around, I knew that we had convened for the first time ever CEOs on LGBT equality, and business leaders on LGBT equality and companies. But then I looked and I thought, what is there for that next generation of LGBT talent in business? And 8 years ago, there was nothing. And so we created OutNext to really actually help you do three things. One, I want to give you best-in-class leadership development. Two, I want you to connect to your peers all around the world, and I'll come back to that. And three, I want you to be connected to senior leaders in your industry and across industries so that you can be successful. I firmly believe that LGBT leaders have what I call gay vantage or LGBT vantage or queer vantage because we are empathetic. We have to code switch between the straight world and the gay world. And that gives us a certain level of understanding, and it gives us a leadership opportunity, in my opinion. And too often we have not taken that leadership opportunity because we've been either afraid or discriminated against. And the young leaders that are part of OutNext, luckily, generationally, have not had to experience the discrimination at the same levels that my generation and older generations did. And so the opportunity for you to not have that baggage and to come into something like OutNext and into your companies and take full advantage of that is tremendous. And I'm really excited that you're here today. You are joining a global cohort of over 2,500 young leaders from 5 continents all around the world who have gone through different versions of this programming. When I first started it, we partnered with McKinsey & Company and used their centered leadership curriculum. The next several years, we partnered with PwC and used a curriculum that they built with us. And the last 9 months, my team, led by Jane Barry Moran, has actually created our own OutLeadership OutNext curriculum. And you're about to experience the first of those 6 modules. The modules ideally are focused on teaching you life skills, leadership skills, and helping you be as successful as you can possibly be. And that really, if you think about that as you're trying to navigate your career in the virtual environment, navigating your career through your personal brand, the modules are focused to help you do that. So today, we're focusing on resiliency. The second module is understanding the power of your story and how to sell your brand. How do you communicate who you are in your career and in your company and to your leadership? Next, we focus on intersectionality as our superpower, because as a community, LGBTQ people are intersectional across all dimensions of diversity. Then we talk about networking in a global virtual world. I strongly feel that the global gay network or LGBTQ network is the most powerful in the world, and you're a part of it. How can you leverage that? How can you make sure that you're tapping into the full potential that this network can provide to help your career? Not Your Average Myers-Briggs is module 5, and that's really focusing on knowing yourself. If you've taken the Myers-Briggs test before, it really can show you where you get energy, where you get power, what depletes you. And once you understand that, you can use that in your career to help you be more successful. And then finally, rounding it out is being a professional and an activist and an advocate. And how do you sort of navigate that? How can you bring advocacy and activism into your daily life as a leader in a company or as an entrepreneur? So I'm really excited for you to learn all of these different pieces. We have the leadership pieces, and then we will have breakout rooms where you'll get to network. And I encourage you to do a couple things. One, pay close attention and learn from the leaders that we've convened for you, and I'll introduce them in just a second. Two, really take away some action items. I encourage you to write down things as you go through each of these modules that you want to take away, that you want to bring back to your companies and your daily life so that you can improve your career. And three, pay it forward. I want you to engage in this network and bring more people along, right? So if you really get a lot out of this from module 1, invite some of your colleagues at your company to module 2. Talk about it, leverage it, tell your company that it mattered to you, because obviously OutLeadership needs their support to bring this programming to you. I really want you to take advantage of it. And if you talk to alumni who have been a part of this program, you'll hear from so many of them how this changed their careers, changed their lives, and really made a true impact. OutNext is one of my favorite things that OutLeadership does all around the world. And you'll get to learn more about OutLeadership's work as you go through these modules as well. So I hope you'll engage. I hope that you'll stay engaged and that you learn, and this makes an impact in your career. So thank you for joining us. And with that, I'm going to introduce our panelist and our moderator. Alan Shaw is the president and CTO of Recycle Track Systems and the founding partner of Deed. Alan and I have known each other for many years. He was actually at Bank of America prior to this role, and he can share some of his leadership learnings. John Benaj is managing partner of Full Circle Capital and a founding partner of Deed as well. John and I have also known each other a very long time from his legal career and past lives, and he can chat about that as well. Mark Gilmore is the founder of Rising Brightly and also a founding partner of Deed, and Mark and I have met over the years in London as well. And finally, the last but not least, our fabulous moderator, Mary Sharon Owen. Mary Sharon is head of Creative Studio, Illumina, and founder of MShare Consulting LLC. I unfortunately have not had until just this morning the pleasure of spending time with Mary Sharon, but I really appreciate her willingness to be here with us today. So with that, thank you all for lending us your time and talents, and I'm going to turn it over to Mary Sharon.
Thanks, Todd. And thank you everyone for joining this morning. We are excited to have what we're considering just a very interactive discussion about labels. And there are labels that society puts on us, whether we like it or not. Some of them are made up within our own cultures, and some of them are made up within other cultures and put on us. And so today we're going to talk about how these labels can basically be put on you, but they don't have to define you. And so we're going to unpack a little bit about how labels can be limiting, but they also can potentially drive signature strengths. To Todd's point about gay advantage, is there a way for you to use your labels and the combination of your labels and start to think about how they could potentially bring certain signature strengths that are unique just to you, whether it's, gay, bisexual, Black, woman, trans, queer, but there's mother, there's vice president, there's shareholder. How do you start to take your specific combination of labels and strengths and start to create a powerful package that really sets you up for your own path? And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to use some of these labels in a bespoke way, ultimately to create your own reality. And so with that, I'm going to kick off on just the power of going first. So just if you look at everything that's happening in pop culture right now, even within corporate culture, due to some of the recent events with racism and George Floyd and Pride, we're starting to see companies just becoming more emboldened and being willing to be the first ones to go first, the first ones to actually call out racism by name, the first ones to say enough is enough, and I'm going to be the first to kind of go out in the skinny branch and have an opinion, and I'm asking you all to join me on that and build on that. And so sometimes when we think about just being an underrepresented minority in the room, whether if you're in a room and you're the only person who looks like you, or you're the only person with that label, for example, often if you say something, everyone notices. If you don't say something, everyone notices. And so while that can certainly be very uncomfortable, and there's definitely a weight that comes with that we do not want to dismiss, is there a way for us to start leveraging that as an ability to go first and ultimately create our own reality and create our own narrative? So I'm going to open up to the panel just for some general thoughts on that.
Well, heck, I'll kick it off.
Look at you, Alan.
First of all, this is a great opportunity to do the method a little differently, right? So this is not a normal Q&A, and so I think what you'll have today from all of us is just a dialogue, right? So we're in our kitchen here, or at least John is hanging out in my kitchen here in London. You've got Mary Sharon in California, and so hopefully as we get through the dialogue, we start to hear from others as well. But to kind of kick it off, the power of going first, it's interesting, Mary Sharon, if you remember, not too long ago, you and I hosted an Out in Tech event where we had a group of transgender students join us at a previous company we both worked at. And one of the questions that one of the students mentioned, or one of the concerns that they shared, was they didn't know if being maybe the first transgender CEO was something that they're ready to embrace and to really handle and deal with. And in that conversation, we talked about, while the power of going first was heavy because they may have been the very first in the world, or at least they may have been the most visible, right, in the world, that actually that gave them the opportunity to control that narrative. They gave them the opportunity to set the stage. It gave them the opportunity to create a reality where it wasn't odd, or it wasn't inappropriate, or it wasn't quote unquote queer for a transgender individual to be the CEO of a major corporation. And so that's a great example of the power of going first. It gives you the opportunity to actually strike the first chord, and gives you the opportunity to actually create a narrative that is owned by you and defined by you, and not allowing another group or an individual to label you or allow them to control that narrative. So I think that's a great example of why going first is so important.
I think that's really interesting too, Alan, because even when you think about companies, startup, whether you're a startup or you're in the Fortune 100, there is a tremendous value, right, in first market advantage. And you being the company to go first and ultimately deciding what the offering is allows you to penetrate a market first, quite literally. But that's very uncomfortable. And I think for many of us who have worked in Fortune 50 companies or worked at startups, it takes a tremendous amount of confidence and an almost unwavering belief in success to think that you can pull this off. And so when you were talking about being the first, we know that there's a period in your life and in your career where you just feel a little wobbly, right? You don't necessarily even want to be the first. You don't want anyone to see you. You just want to kind of do your job role and do it well and get promoted every year. And unfortunately, that's not always the reality. So can you use, like, you know, those feelings that you're constantly recalibrating? I think that over time, you almost just start to get very uncomfortable being the other. It just starts to feel like a part of your being over the course of years. Does that help you when you're sitting in some of those boardrooms and you're thinking, you know what, I think we can do this? Because you're the one that now has the confidence, you've got the resilience, you can manage your own emotions. Like, should something go wrong and you have to elevate and pivot. By learning about that personally, does that help you become a better leader to help others get uncomfortable?
I think for sure. I mean, I think that some of the people that some of our peers will have gotten to a place where we get to without as, maybe, you know, this may be judging them, but without as much work as we have to put into it. So I mean, I think that we have had a lot, I mean, we will have a lot of lessons and a lot of challenge, which I do think makes us better leaders. And I think to your point about being wobbly too in the beginning, I think it does take a little while for you to, I think a lot of people go through a phase where they decide, you know, it's quietly at first. You try to figure out how you might fit in, but I think you realize that if you don't lead the narrative, someone's going to define you for you. And unless you're going to always be having to explain unless you're leading. So it's better to lead and let other people figure out what, you know, than to have other people try to, yeah, rather than, you know, hold back and let other people create a narrative which you don't feel is yours.
Good point. Yeah, no one remembers the second person that went, right? I mean, everyone remembers the first person that spoke and the first person who kind of laid down a particular point of view. No one remembers really the person who came second or third.
I'm going to add a couple of things here, which I think are super important with this, that going first and being bold, I think those was absolutely crucial in this because we need more of this in the world. But we also need, and I think all of us have a great receptiveness for listening. And going first also means opening up to and being ready, setting the agenda to say, we're also going to listen. Going first does not mean to say you're going to set the agenda and it's there in concrete. No, it's actually, we're going to set the agenda and truly listen. But the other thing is humility. And, you know, being bold, particularly in a world like now, and you go out and you project maybe your company image or your brand image, just reflect on internal, what's going on? Can you get better? Can your company get better? Think about all the ecosystem of what's going on. And we all know that if you get that wrong and you go out there and be bold, but you're not reflective about yourself, it can cause a lot of problems as well. So it's that, you know, there's a balance here to really be struck.
I think that's a really interesting point, Mark, when you think about just the power of truly intersectional leaderships, right? So again, whether if you're gay and you're female, or you've got these labels that are in different domains and often in different paradigms. And as you were talking, Mark, I was thinking of just even being biracial, right? So growing up with a large Irish Catholic family and a large Black American family, you often feel like you're a double agent. Like you're kind of able to translate for both sides what they need to hear in order to move forward, or even in many cases, understand one another, right? Really understand where they're coming from. And I think for many of us with these labels, we kind of find ourselves in those positions where we are these massive translators. Does anyone have an opinion about how that can be a particular advantage, both within our communities or within our corporate cultures?
I mean, I always thought that kind of there's a gift of being part of the other, and I think it makes you. It comes out in lots of different ways, but I would hope that one of the things it does is, like you said, you end up being kind of this. Your experience is kind of in between, so you're basically navigating two worlds. Maybe because you have to play in both worlds, or maybe because you're the person that is forced to kind of mediate between two worlds. But I mean, I think the gift of other, like, you know, has lots of ways it manifests itself. But I think that's like, it comes back to Mark's point a little bit about one of the things is translating your own experience of others to someone else's other. Being gay, I understand certain things, but I won't understand things that are outside my experience, but I might be a little more receptive and a little bit more ready and able to support someone who is Black or who is trans. So I think one of the real gifts of being other is the experience we have, which we can then translate to bring other people up behind us.
And there's something you said there, Mary Sharon, which is incredibly important. And just thinking about are you between the sides and saying this side or that side. When I was younger and very early on in my career, I always felt I needed to be in a particular camp. And I needed to identify with that if I wanted to get along, if I wanted to be accepted. And in a way, if I wanted to avoid some of the things which I truly was as well, and I was struggling with it at the time. And I think, I can still to this day remember leadership and directives which weren't celebrating me coming out as an individual, not just sexually, but also in terms of my sexual preference, but in terms of some of the things which I really believe are my core strengths now, which before would not have been accepted. And as leaders, we have to be really, really mindful of allowing people to come out and not be in different segments or categorized by things. It's so, so important.
I think that's a really important point, Mark, and thank you for sharing that, because I think many of us universally can relate essentially to being on a fast track and doing very well, and then realizing that if you want to essentially ascend into the higher ranks or get into the top of the pyramid where there are less resources, potentially more landmines, you're going to have to conform. And so who decides who you are going to be? And I remember that what you were sharing with me reminds me of a time in my early 20s. I was doing very well working in high tech, predominantly male environment. If there were women, they were white. And a VP pulled me aside, and this is a mentor of mine. And she said, if you want to get to VP, you're going to have to start straightening your hair. And I remember thinking, like, my hair is not a political statement. And it certainly has nothing to do with what's going on in here. And it has nothing to do with what I believed was my potential in the company. But she made it very clear that in order for me to be taken seriously, I was going to have to straighten my hair. And I think that's not obviously the same mark and doesn't carry the same weight, right, as sexuality. But I think many of us have had to kind of go home and process that and say, okay, how much am I willing to give up of myself and my own pride in what I am and who I am as a being in order to be successsul? Is there any?
If those are micro, that might be one thing, but they all add up.
Right.
And if you're those adding, that adds up to something very big. So it should not be trivialized.
Right. Well, yes. And I think also, for me anyway, the way that I processed this, I thought, okay, I'm not going to straighten my hair, but I just knew that I was going to have to bring it in every meeting. And what I ended up doing, if I'm being perfectly honest, I would lower my voice. I actually started to take on more male traits in meetings, and I'm not sure if that was good or bad for me, but I think I felt like I had to kind of take all those variables and try to balance them out. Everything that was available to me, everything that society was telling me to do, and kind of, again, start to create my own brand, if you will. But that's hard. Does anyone have any thoughts on that or how to do that?
Creating your own brand?
I know that you do, Mr. Allen Weisenschlaff.
Well, it's again, it goes back to, are you going to allow others to define you? Or are you going to take that opportunity to actually change the narrative? So I'll give a really quick example. Oftentimes when individuals interact with me, it's over email, right? It may be even over phone calls. And so you see, Allen, A-L-L-Y-N, Shaw, S-H-A-W. Probably does not look like a 5'10", African-American guy from Compton, California. And so often when I walk into that meeting for the very first time, right, depending on the scenario, they might think I'm there because I'm, there to help set up the AV room, or, I just might be the president of the company that's getting ready to start a staff meeting. The point is, I utilize those opportunities to then define that moment and use that opportunity to then capture the attentions of other people who might have had a label, or might have had a point of view, but I use that opportunity to really prove and show otherwise. And so I think often we think that we cannot define our own path, or we think that a label in particular restricts us. And I think that only is true if we allow it. And it's only true if we subscribe to that way of thinking. And so I'm a firm believer that you can cast your own vote. You can define your own reality. You can create your own brand, but you just have to be courageous and bold enough to do so. Stop waiting for others to frankly empower you. Empower your damn self.
Can I ask you a question, Alan?
Sure.
When do you feel you found that courage in your journey? Because, you know, I certainly lacked courage early on, and I did much the same. I used to go into meetings feeling I had to be this, you know, this, that, and the other. Where did you feel that courage and that step to do, or was it a gradual process?
It was definitely gradual. And it really, I would say, accelerated with the birth of my nephews. So when I then started to realize that there were two young Black men who, had I not been more visible, and if I did not take a more active role in their development and in the communities that they ultimately would live in, that they could experience the same trials and tribulations that I experienced. And I didn't want that. And so I took it upon myself. Really, I created an urgency within myself to do more, to be more visible, to take more of a responsibility and an obligation, and to help create better communities. Not only for me, of course, but really when my two nephews came to this earth, I thought, you know what, I wanted to be a better place for them. So that's, for me, that's when it really accelerated, knowing that these two individuals could have a better life if I would just be a little more selfless and do more in their community.
And I'm going to share just a personal anecdote, and then I do have a question that Alan does touch on. Alan and I had the privilege of working together. I had the privilege of working with Alan a couple of years ago in New York in creative marketing. But as we were talking about this, it's this idea of being in the moment, right? And I think sometimes it's so hard when you're focusing on so many other things, and you experience one of the isms in real time, and it's public, and you're in a leadership position, and you do have a moment, right, to either reframe the way that people view you or they view others, or you have a moment to teach a lesson. And I remember, again, working in high tech, and I was very senior, I think, for my age, and also just being a Black woman. And basically one of our vendors had made a mistake and screwed up. And so I had called a meeting. Essentially, they needed to fix it within 24 hours, and there's a lot of money in the line. And I was the only woman on the calendar invite. And I was the one who had called the meeting, and this was my project. And so I'm sitting in a room with 11 men, and I just said, well, what are we waiting for? And they said, well, we're waiting for Mary Sharon Owens to get here. And I remember, and I looked at them and I was like, what makes you think I'm not Mary Sharon Owens? And it's like in these moments, right, you just lack the presence of mind for like the pithy response, or it's like you wish you could say so many things, but you're so taken aback that you just are like, just move on. And so the reason I'm bringing this up, Alan, is because I remember very distinctly us working on a project, and for anyone who's on the call who works in advertising, it's very common to kind of do the gradual racial introduction or the gradual underrepresented introduction when you think about photos, stock photography, like art direction, where you typically start with, a white, straight looking person. And then even in a PowerPoint deck with like the background slides, eventually by like the third or fourth slide, you start to get to the brownies. Or if you look at a lot of commercials, maybe by like the third or the fourth still, you'll start to see the brownies show up. And I had actually started a PowerPoint deck for a campaign with a Black woman first. And there were several people on this call, Alan, if you remember, globally. And a gentle comment was made, oh, you know what, I think we need to move him up front. And it was very clear that it was because that would make the deck a little more consumable, if you will, for the executive who was going to be receiving it. And I remember thinking, okay, again, is this a moment where I put my hooves in the ground? And I remember Alan said, no, she stays where she is. How have you learned, Alan, in these moments to not do it in the way where it feels like you're raising your fist and you're being an activist, but you aren't going to let that go? You know what I mean? Like, that's really tough, I think, in the moment.
Yeah. Well, my favorite quote, bringing the gifts my ancestors gave, I am the hope and the dream of a slave. And so in those moments that really, really matter, I tend to draw upon the fact that there have been millions of people who have given their lives so that I have the opportunity to use this voice, or have the opportunity to leverage this mind, or have the opportunity to be here with all of you, Mary Sharon, Mark, and John, to have this conversation. And so I I don't know if it's a mathematical equation as to when I engage and when I know when it's the right time, but I do feel deep inside that I have an opportunity to do something different. Certainly have the opportunity to at least question or cause us to question and not just go with the status quo. So for me, it's about family, it's about community, it's about doing what is right, it's about making sure everyone has a voice. But if you're in a leadership position, that's what leadership is about. It's not always about doing what's safe, it's about doing what's right.
I think that's interesting. I think it's also knowing that well, it's partly a thing that you evolve to, I think, but it's also knowing that the people who are around you are going to respect that basically you're in a position where you're not, you are leading, and people around you are going to sort of come around that decision. I mean, I think it is easy to be, when you're young, it is easy to be kind of emotional reactionary. Like if you to challenge something, you can look, I don't know, you can look, I'm not sure what the right word is. I would say shrieky, but I mean, certainly when I was young, I think that's something I struggled with because I'm not tall. I don't have a presence. I looked like a boy for a long time. And so I think I really struggled with that quiet authority to challenge something that I didn't think was right. I think it's something that just develops, but I think partly it's around something that's happens internally, but something also around the people who are around you and kind of look to you to lead. I think people sort of look to you for leadership. And then I think that makes you know that your decision is going to be supported.
Mary Sharon, there was something you said, and it was quite close to my heart when you talked about advertising. And we all know that media and communications has an incredible impact on society and how people view each other. And I was reflecting on this panel discussion, and only this morning I was saying to John and Alan, oh my gosh, I'm a brand marketeer, and my life is spent trying to label and get things down to this distilled essence. And I'm now reading so much, and I'm thinking, my gosh, maybe my whole life work is actually unraveling now, and I should not be labeling and branding. But then it sort of dawned on me that actually, as leaders, it's yes about those moments when creatively you might choosing an image and making sure, but actually, what's happening in the briefing? What's happening when you set the project agenda before people even choosing images, choosing stuff, to say, as a leader, how are you truly embracing intersectionality and not stereotyping and labeling? And maybe things like our approach to segmentation is wrong. We talk about socioeconomic, automatically saying everyone in that whatever socioeconomic needs to be that person, or it might be an age group. Who's to say that someone an octogenarian doesn't sort of want to act like a millennial? And we've got this obsession with millennials. So I think it's in the briefing stage and thinking, actually, what are we setting as an agenda here for what we want to do?
I love that. And I think you're so right, because it is a creative process, right, Mark? I mean, you're constantly looking for the insights. And I think for those of us who come from that creative world, there's facts, there's information, there's data, and then there's insight. And insight is when you're pulling on what's happening in pop culture, what is, emotionally, where are people at, whether it's with your product, your company, or with other things that are happening in your sphere. And it's a constant conversation, right? Up until the final product. And I'm wondering, Mark, if that is an opportunity for us as leaders. Let's just even say, like, in the moment, because I think, and this is something that I know when I've talked to several like younger people who are kind of like trying to figure out what kind of leader are they going to be and how are they going to work with these labels. It's very intimidating in that briefing meeting, for example, to raise your hand and say, I really just don't think that's how Blacks want to be portrayed. I really just think that feels very stereotypically gay, guys, because if you're not in a leadership position, that doesn't always go well. But is there an opportunity in the creative process for you to make small influences and small changes that ultimately will change the product? Because I think once you see, to your point, people will grow toward an image of the future. We know that. That's just the human condition. So it's like maybe there's opportunities for us to just kind of influence where we can, influence without authority, but not necessarily feel like, again, in that moment, we've got to raise the fist, because that does put people at risk. And I think that's why you don't see a lot of people of color or women, quite frankly, in the upper ranks of advertising.
So I totally get that. I understand that and John, you mentioned it, right? There's individuals that have a role, influence, their title, but I think that leadership is much more than that. I think an individual that is being thoughtful and being very deliberate and really saying something that matters. I think you don't have to necessarily be a leader. I think you just need to be. Well, I actually think that is leadership, frankly. I think having the courage to say, you know what, that doesn't feel right, or you know what, I'm here, I'm in this meeting, I'm here for a reason. Well, then let me use my voice. So I think if you're present and you're part of that dialogue, I think it's all in. I would actually encourage people to speak up more because, again, if it's right, it's right, and if it's thoughtful, and people are going to see that.
You know what I loved about what you just said too, Alan? It's articulating with humor too. Like, look,
yeah.
If you're the only one in the room, you're like, yes, I get it, guys. I'm the only woman and I'm the only Black person. Yes. But anyway, I still have this opinion. Sometimes just articulating and like acknowledgement is a very powerful emotion, right? And sometimes even acknowledging the awkwardness of what you've just introduced, it just makes people feel more comfortable. So I think that what you're describing is interesting in terms of just explaining yourself as well. Maybe that's a way for other people to gain understanding. There are some questions in the chat. Are we okay just flipping over to those questions?
Why not? Let's do it.
So from Stephanie Dement, it looks like the question is, how do we lead with inclusivity and diversity without highlighting our varied identities? So it's almost the flip. Any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I mean, I love difference. I get it, but I actually feel that by allowing and really embracing other people's perspectives and point of views and their experiences and their journeys, it actually creates a more enriched dialogue, a more I think a more enriched outcome. I don't think that everything has to be necessarily homogeneous. I think embracing that difference is important, because I think once we embrace the difference, we start to see that we're actually more alike and more common than we may have thought to begin with. So I get the question. I totally understand it, but I don't prefer that we run away from the difference. I think we should run towards it and find that commonality in it.
It's interesting. Coming from once a legal background, it's easier, I think, when you're in a very technical subject to think that you're just doing the best thing, so that like your identity doesn't come into the work product. Unlike marketing, for instance, that just, I mean, I don't know how you would market without some idea of label, but yeah, I mean, as a lawyer, so I think I used to think that by doing the job the best I could possibly do, there would be no issue, that basically that I could create the best product and I get the most recognition. I think, as you say, Alan, it's very difficult outside actually the delivery. But look, if you think about yourself in the organization, you think about yourself, your career trajectory, if you think about all the other aspects of you being in an organization, I think then it's still difficult to lead without an awareness of the labels that are all, you know, the labels you've chosen, the ones that people are putting on you.
And I think the thing which I am still learning, and I still have a long journey to go, is leaning into difference when it makes you feel uncomfortable. Because, you know, even John Allen and myself, and we're starting an organization and whatever, we have differences between, and sometimes I think, hang on a minute, does that mean, you know, our friendship's going to break? Does that mean all these things go through your mind? But actually, when you come out of it, you realize you're actually, and to Mary Sharon, to your point, you get a better product because your insight has grown. So to shy away from difference, I think, is in the long run going to be detrimental to leaning in and really, and just getting used to a bit of uncomfort, and think to yourself, how do I feel about this uncomfortableness? What do I need to do about it? How do I respond, not react to it? And I think, you know, I have a lot to go there, but that's been very, very helpful tool to me as I move along.
That's great. We have a question from Delvin Diggs. What's the best way to encourage others to be themselves and explain the importance of being yourself in an organization?
Mary Sharon, why don't you take that one?
I was going to say, I think, you know, so for much of my career, I have been responsible for introducing a new capability to an organization. Alan has seen this firsthand when I built a creative studio within a $14 billion tech business where no one really understood the creatives. And kind of thought that what we were doing was arts and crafts and they did all the serious stuff. And so I think something that I constantly am telling my teams, regardless of their labels or their background or their privilege, is just the importance of empathy and courage. Because if you want to drive change, change is incredibly challenging as a person, as an organization. And when you start to get at like organizational transformation levels, every single person is going to feel like they're on the front lines, particularly the team that's introducing something new. And so for me, I think encouraging people to be themselves is actually a big part of the game, because look, people have an uncanny ability to recognize intent. If you're not being authentic, we know. Like, it doesn't really matter what's coming out of your mouth. And I think in order to drive change, you have to build relationships that are real, and they have to build trust, period. So I think it's very challenging to try to be a successful leader without trust. And I think we've all seen, you know, where that goes wrong. I think we've all worked for people that to this day, you probably run through fire for them because they connected with you as a human being and you trusted them implicitly. So for me, I always encourage my teams, look, every one of us has a circle of competency. So again, labels are limiting. I really don't like people describing themselves as an executive creator of visual design. You do a lot of things. It's just that your circle of competency might be around visual design or verbal design, but let's not even introduce ourselves that way. Let's introduce ourselves as your name and what you're here to talk about today, and focus the entire conversation on value, because then people actually start to get to know all of your different sides and your hybrids, and people will then start to know you for you. And that just means that you're being yourself. So that's my long-winded thought on that.
It builds trust too, right? I mean, if you take that approach, you start to build real trust between either you or multiple individuals that you're engaging with, and actually trust builds engagement. Right? People engage with you more if they feel they have a level of trust with you. So I love everything you just said there.
I also like to point about labels. I mean, like the technical labels, because I think a lot of times they're just for lazy people. And it kind of prevents you from actually inquiring and seeing and recognizing the person behind the label. So I mean, if like, people often introduce me as, you know, what used to be a partner, now it's managing director of blah blah blah, you know, and well, in fact, now it's private equity. And like as soon as you say private equity, like it brings like 5 or 6 different, a whole host of ideas, and like that's. I don't know. Anyway, yeah. So I think if we can avoid using those, yeah, I completely agree with you, Mary Sharon.
I think, John, it's such an interesting point about labels inhibiting curiosity, because it almost just cuts the conversation. And you know, we are human beings at heart, all of us. We have beating hearts, and actually curiosity is fundamental to us getting along and you know, and intersecting. The other thing I just want to raise about the question. And my previous boss, who, you know, arguably is an incredibly successful entrepreneur, he used to actually say and do things that, you know, which were incredibly humbling about himself. He'd be the first one to say what his weaknesses were, particularly around, you know, numbers and things like this. And it was the first time I really experienced that a leader can show their weaknesses. And I realized the power of showing weakness is incredible. And we've grown up to believe that weakness is a weakness.
I really love that flip, Mark. And I think that you're right. I think that I think many of us would agree that it is incredibly, not only is it powerful to see someone, again, have the power of going first and exposing vulnerability, for example, but I think it also makes you feel like, okay, if my leader has this circle of competency and it's not mine, I actually feel part of something bigger now, because I know that I'm filling a gap. And that actually is what brings teams together, right? And you can't have the conversation where people feel valued for their signature strengths if you're not willing to share that you don't have them. You know, that just feels like an organic part of a team coming together and relying, like business athletes, right? Just kind of relying on one another to get the ball down the field. That is a very inspirational and energizing experience. And as leaders, I would like to think that that's kind of our job, is to create those types of teams. So I'm going to go back to, so I think I know this, Fred Harris. We have a question from Fred, who I believe is a banking executive in cybersecurity, if my memory serves me right. How can we as leaders accelerate the changing of hearts and minds necessary to foster real change in the corporate world? In the wake of Me Too, we saw an increase in female C-suite and board members. In the wake of Black Lives Matter, we are already seeing a similar reaction for Black professionals. How can we stop reacting to the pressure of the moment, but rather build an environment? That's interesting. I'm curious to know if I'm really seeing the same amount of progress being actually made for Black professionals as they were for, I would say, maybe white professional women. I think there's a lot of performance and marketing out there, but I don't know that I'm seeing the HR changes and the hiring changes yet. That's my personal thought. I've actually just had a conversation recently with my own leadership at Illumina about this. But it's a great question. How can we as leaders accelerate the changing of hearts and minds necessary to foster real change in the corporate world?
Yeah, I think, Mark and I have chatted about a hero of both of ours, Brian Stevenson. He talks about proximity, right? It's my concern. I share your concern, Mary Sharon, which is it's trendy right now to be interested in Black lives, but will it persist? Will we actually see the fundamental and the structural changes in corporate America that will actually start to dismantle the label of what it means to be Black and actually get to the core of what it means to be human, and why this individual, because of their skill sets, because of their experiences, is the right person for our organization. I don't know if we're there yet, but proximity, I think, could be one of the answers, Fred. And shout out to you, Fred. Get to hear that you've got a question out there. It's hard to fundamentally make change if you don't really understand the problem. And it's hard to really understand the problem if you don't actually go and witness it and experience it, or at least be in proximity of it yourself. And so I think that could be a way to your point, Fred, to your question. I think that could be a way to address the problem.
Can I just maybe just change the phraseology a little bit, or maybe it's the same thing, but I mean, we always talk about allyship, like white, straight allies for the LGBT community. What frustrates me, but I think it's really urgent, is allyship within different strands of diversity. And I feel like, like LGBT people need to be allies to people who are of color, and people, and to people who are not gendered the same way they are. And I think a lot of the solution is for us to be aware of the breadth of our own of diversity, and sometimes we need to work, I think, a little bit more closely together. And there's always a flavor of the month, but like we need not to react, as you said, Mary Sharon. We need to be consistent, and we need to. I think we need to identify with everybody who is outside the mainstream. I mean, and no one should be left behind. And I just think that if we work together and we kind of think a little more broadly, that will be a move in the right direction.
All right, we have a question from Travis Ewell. Do you feel the exhaustion of having to come out, whether it be from colleague to colleague, team to team, company to company, multiple times throughout your career? Or do you sometimes not even bother coming out? And if so, why? It's interesting because I think even universally, right, this idea of, especially as we start to become more a part of like the gig economy, if you will, it is somewhat of a drain to feel like, and let's do this again, and because there is an emotional tax to that. But I am an ally, so I'm not going to answer this question.
I mean, it's I'll kick it off. Why not? Why not? Wow. So, I mean, I'm coming out right now, yet again. So there's 111 participants, I think, and I don't know all 111 people, I'm sure. And so, I don't know, I feel for me, I still have that initial like pit in my stomach when I first start and say, hi, my name is Alan, and I'm queer, or I'm other, or I'm not something that you might think I am. But I think soon after, I see there's again, owning your narrative. If I am owning that narrative and I am describing who I am and what's important to me and how I want to participate in the conversation or participate in the community, then I may have been given that label, but I'm defining it at that point. And that's what gives me the strength to keep coming out. Again, I think it would be weird if I didn't feel that pit in my stomach. To me, maybe I won't be as human as I would hope to be, but I think that's what makes us human. I think that initial shock is what keeps us connected to others, and the sensitivity of what it means to come out to yet another person. So that's how I feel about it.
And Alan, I so relate to that, you know, and you know, for years I thought, you know, actually I just need to eliminate that because that's wrong, but actually that's part of my journey. That comfort and feeling like that is part of my coming out journey. And, you know, and we're in a way, you know, quite fortunate, I imagine, that you know, we can live in a place where we feel like that. But think about all those many people around the world who are in organizations who it's unsafe for them to do so. And how can we as an allied community support them and think about that, because, you know, that is a real issue.
Well, and one thing I will say as an ally that was interesting is, you know, I literally, it was 2016, it was after the election. And I think we all had many of us on this call had a pit in their stomach, to say the very least. And I remember thinking at this point, whatever, I'm just going on the road, I'm going to be there for everybody. And I started to get very active in like out in tech, lesbians, like just being there, whether it was through hiring, sponsorships, just speaking on stages. And what was interesting is that my internet presence would now have you believe that I am gay. And so I've actually run into situations with my own direct reports, for example, and, you know, I'll get these comments like, you know, it's just so awesome to work for like such a strong, powerful Black lesbian leader. And in those moments, it hits me that I'm actually, if you Google me, you probably think that I am at this point. And what's been really interesting is the comments that people have made, that they have put on me. And then I actually have to kind of figure out how do I explain that I'm more of an ally without it being seen as like, oh no, I'm not that. But I will say, I think it's hard when you're hit with assumptions that are made about you when you least suspect it. And even being in hiring rooms where people have said, well, I don't know, Mary Sharon, what do you think? And asking you to speak on behalf of an entire community over and over again, when you're there to be thinking about something else, and all of a sudden you're put on the spot. And that's not really where this question was going, but I do think it's a question of, what do you do when you're the one in the room and you've got the label that everyone knows, and they just automatically turn to you and say, what do you think? Do you embrace it? Do you make a game time decision? Do you politely say, I don't speak on behalf of everyone? What do you think?
I usually make a joke of it just to try to deflect it, because it's just, you don't want to sort of say, I don't speak for everyone, because it just seems like it tends to create a bit of a, I don't know, hostility. But yeah, it's a burden, which I agree. What do you think, Alan?
It's an opportunity to educate. I think because you're right, sometimes you get knocked off course, right? It's you're shocked, right? And so if you're not paying attention, you can find yourself stumbling. But if you can stay in the moment and say, look, you know, use that as an opportunity to educate on maybe how to ask the question differently, or maybe how to approach it differently, and then provide some other opportunities or some other tools for them to get at the same outcome, but in a more appropriate way. I think that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
That's
I will
much
say,
more charitable.
It is much more charitable. You're right.
It's like, I'm not here to educate you all.
You're right.
Yeah.
But you're right. You're so right. But if I don't do that, then it will just keep happening, right? And then I'm contributing to the problem. That's my perspective. But
Exactly. Yeah.
I think what's interesting too, because that word strong lesbian, by the way, has been for over the few years, those seem to be the two labels that I get together. And I have on occasion said, you know, it's interesting. Every time someone says lesbian, they seem to throw in that word strong. And as a woman, that starts to make me nervous, because I think appearing to be a strong, bold woman can be a liability. And I don't know that you want to just necessarily apply certain labels together because you think it's empowering, when actually you're stereotyping people, and you're stereotyping them in a way that may not even be authentic or real for them. So I have tried it in the moment. So, you know, it's interesting. I get those phrases together a lot, but anyway, all right, so I'm going to go back to the panel. I
think actually, Mary Sharon, I think we should start wrap up.
Oh yeah, we are. Oh gosh. It's been a long conversation. Gosh, I could go for another half hour. Okay, so I think in terms of the wrap up, right, we want to leave with just a call to action. You know, I think many of us come to these panels and these discussions because we're looking for inspiration, and we're looking to hang up and say, okay, what do I do immediately next? And so if I could just ask each of you, you know, what guidance would you have for, like, what could people do right away, whether it's sharing something on social, having a conversation at work, you know, reframing a situation? What guidance do you have for us to kind of take what we've learned today and start to amplify this message more broadly? I'm going to start with you, John.
I think for me, I think it's just basically being true to yourself. I mean, I think you need to embrace your identity. I mean, however you define it, think you need to embrace it. It may not be, you may not end up at the place you're at now. It may not be that you're actually compatible with the place. It doesn't always work out in the place you're at, but I think it always works out in the end. So I think it just really embrace your identity and be true to yourself.
Nice.
Mark?
Mark, go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead, Alan, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go. I said it flippantly earlier, but I really meant it. Empower yourself. Stop waiting for permission. Stop waiting for other people to label you. Stop waiting for a group of individuals to lead you down a path that you're not comfortable with. I think we should stop waiting to be empowered, and we should empower ourselves. And it actually builds on nicely to what John said.
And what more can I say? I mean, truly be yourself, but also celebrate. It might be uncomfortable. Don't worry about that. Lean into it and really feel it.
And Mary Sharon?
Yeah, I would say be original, because I think what's really exciting about this time in culture and also just in technology and the speed at which we're all moving, the more that you can distinguish yourself and lead with value, the better off you're going to be from a professional perspective. And so I really don't even think that this is about activism as much as it is about your own growth, because I think if you don't stand out and people don't know when to reach out to you and what signature strengths you soar with, you're not going to be remembered. And I really believe that in this economy, right, it's becoming more collaborative and people are starting to pull on each other for certain skill sets and certain gaps. We're moving away kind of, I think, from this world of you must conform to look like everybody else. And what's becoming much more interesting and quite frankly profitable are people who have very interesting bespoke combinations of skill sets. And I think it's really tough to have the courage to reach out and learn new skill sets if you're still lacking the courage to even be yourself. Like it's like order of operations, right? One comes before the other. So first, if you can learn to just go out in the skinny branch, maybe embarrass yourself a little bit once a day, the more you do that, the more comfortable you're going to be walking into someone else's world from a skill set perspective and saying, hey, teach me about design, teach me about this area of science. And the more that you add these things, I mean, that becomes a really powerful competitive advantage. So for me, I would say, yeah, like focus on being original, because I really do think that's the future for all of us.
Awesome. Well said.
So I don't know if Todd is going to rejoin or to close this out.
No,
No,
not.
We're gonna close this. We're gonna close this out.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you. It's really inspiring to see so many people who join this talk, during their workday. And certainly, I think all of us would agree we are available to you. You can find us on social. You can DM us, and we're all part of a community. And I think we all need to take these labels and these strengths and our passions and our energies, get in these boats and row all the way to November. Like now is the time to row. So I think everyone is available and we are here. So please reach out moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.